Hi, this is Scott Wilkinson, host of Home Theater Geeks. In episode 288, I chat with Brian Markwalter, Senior Vice President of Research and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association, about the state of Ultra HD. So stay tuned.
Netcasts you love.
From people you trust.
This is Twit.
Bandwidth for Home Theater Geeks is provided by CacheFly at CACHEFLY.com.
This is Home Theater Geeks with Scott Wilkinson, recorded January 21st, 2016. Episode 288, CTA on UHD. This episode of Home Theater Geeks is brought to you by the Ring Video Doorbell. With Ring, you can see and talk to anyone at your door from anywhere in the world using your smartphone. It's like caller ID for your home. Right now, get free expedited FedEx shipping when you go to ring.com/HTG. And by Corning Optical Cables. Corning's incredibly durable Thunderbolt and USB 3-point optical cables are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more. And by Drobo, a family of safe and expandable yet simple to use storage arrays. Drobos are dedicated to protect your important data forever. Visit drobo.com/twit and use the code TWIT100 to save $100 off a Drobo Mini, Drobo 4-Bay, or Drobo 5N. Hey there, Scott Wilkinson here, the Home Theater Geek and editor of avsforum.com. This week's guest geek is Brian Markwalter, the Senior Vice President of Research and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association. Hey, Brian, welcome to the show.
Hi, Scott. I'm happy to be here. Finally join you by podcast and internet.
Yep, the wonders of modern technology, which we're going to be talking some about today. But before we do, let me just remind everybody that those who are logged into the chat room at irc.twit.tv, and by doing so, you can do that from the live stream at live.twit.tv. But if you're there, I'll be monitoring the chat room, and you can post questions for us as we go, and I'll pass along as many as I can. It always helps to put my screen name in your message, which is my name, Scott Wilkinson, all one word, no spaces or dashes, because then it appears in a different color on my screen. Now, before we get started, I'd like to thank one of our sponsors for this show, which is Ring. Now, we're all familiar with the sound of a doorbell. I know I am. It means a package is being delivered or friends are coming over for dinner, but it's also the sound of someone planning to rob you. Over 95% of home break-ins happen during the day, and burglars almost always start by ringing your doorbell to see if someone's home before pillaging your possessions. With the Ring Video Doorbell, you can see and talk to anyone at your door from anywhere in the world using your smartphone. Ring's advanced motion detection alerts you even if someone doesn't ring the doorbell. With Ring Video Doorbell, you can talk to delivery people and keep an eye on your package. If someone tries to mess with it, you'll get an instant alert and HD video of the whole thing. It's like having a neighbor keep an eye on your home 24/7. Now, I've got a Ring Video Doorbell that I just started to set up, and man, oh man, is it easy. Very simple. I have an iPhone, download the app. It connects right away to the Ring Video Doorbell through my home Wi-Fi network, and boom, I'm connected. I can get the door, I can answer the door and see who's there. It's super easy, really, really great. They even include all the mounting hardware and screws and drill bits and so on to get it mounted onto near your front door or your back door, wherever you want it. It's really very cool. Installing Ring takes only minutes, and it works with either your current wiring or a built-in rechargeable battery. It's a USB rechargeable battery. Put your mind at ease and protect your home with the Video Doorbell. Time Magazine and USA Today named one of their top 10 gadgets of 2015. Go to ring.com/HTG for free expedited FedEx shipping. That's ring.com/HTG. With Ring, you are always home. And we thank Ring very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. All right. So, Brian, I wanted to address something that might be confusing a few people. The organization you work for, the Consumer Technology Association, recently changed its name. It used to be, and for a long time, was called the Consumer Electronics Association. You guys actually put on the big CES show that we just finished a couple weeks ago. Why did you change the name of the organization?
Yes, great question, Scott. So we were formerly Consumer Electronics Association, and like the show reflects, it's grown to be much more than electronics. And so we felt, and we discussed with our board, we felt like consumer technology was a more encompassing name and reflected really our membership and where the industry is going. So it's no slight to the hardware manufacturers, but the industry includes software and services, and our members are range from Uber to Facebook and others, including many of the service providers that deliver the content, and actually the content creators like Fox and Warner Brothers. So Consumer Technology Association is a forward-looking name for us and reflects what we think is going on in the industry.
Well, that does make some sense, and I'm glad to help people understand, why it is that name, which had been there for a very long time, got changed, to reflect the times, which makes total sense. Regarding CES, which we just came from, I was wondering if you knew, for example, what the attendance numbers were. Was it bigger than ever? I know that the square footage, I just saw a report, was almost 2.5 million square feet. It's like,
correct,
holy
yes.
smokes. Wow.
Yes. Yes, it was a fantastic show. And so we did just put out, we've had a press release right at the end of the show. I think I've seen an update. So the show did reach 2.47 million net square feet. So you're right, just under 2.5. And that is a record for floor space. We're reporting about 170,000 attendees. So we're one of the shows that actually has an independent audit of our attendance. So we will, in a month or two, we will announce an audited numbers that will be final. So we don't really know yet whether it's an attendance record. It'll be on par with last year, I'm sure. Mm-hmm. Now, we have had great international attendance. So those numbers, I think we were in the 40-something thousand last year, and I think we'll be comparable. We get thousands of press, and you see the coverage and are part of all the good stories that come out of CES. So yeah, it was a great show for us. A lot of tremendous announcements.
Really great show for me too. I've heard a number of people say that, CES might be becoming less relevant, but for me, for my industry, which is audio and video, it certainly isn't. And I had much more to cover than I possibly could, but it kept me running around. Now, I've been told that CES is the largest trade show in the world. Is that really true?
So it depends on how you look at it. Certainly the largest technology trade show in the world. It's the largest annual show in the U.S. There are some shows that do not happen every year. I think there's a construction equipment, kind of agriculture equipment show that happens every 2 or 3 years. And I don't even know if it's bigger anymore. They take up a lot of outdoor space because they have big equipment. But yeah, right. Very, very clearly we're, I think the largest technology trade show in the world.
Mm-hmm. Well, that wouldn't surprise me at all because it takes 4 or 5 days just to even cover part of it, which I certainly did. But in any event, that's just a little bit of we just came from there and it's fresh in our minds. Yep. And one of the things that was fresh in our minds that was really important at this CES in particular, and I've made note of it many times, is high dynamic range for video displays and for content. I've said for a long time now, a couple of years, that Ultra HD TVs with more pixels might have been a bit premature. I've said that the manufacturers maybe jumped the gun a bit because just adding more pixels without having other aspects of improvement you know, it offers a marginal benefit. But now that we have high dynamic range, wide color gamut, the improvement is starting to really increase. You know, and so I wanted to know what the the CTA has to say about that particular development at CES this year.
Yeah, so you're correct. There has been this debate for a couple of years now about whether Ultra HD TVs were kind of chasing the right goal. But, you know, in my mind, consumers crave better quality, and there are a number of ways that displays deliver that. Resolution's one. That happened to be one of the first things that TV manufacturers could do a really great job on with their own upscaling and just the panel technology that was available. And so what we see now is that the other kind of parameters, in particular, high dynamic range was what got a lot of coverage at the show and leading into the show, and wide color. But you know, so I think those things go together. Now consumers will be able to get you know, an even better combination of display characteristics. So the 4K Ultra HD TVs, CTA has a logo with a certification requirements for it that mandates the 3840 by 2160 resolution. And then others have added parameters for high dynamic range capability. So I think the bar is going up and quality is getting better for consumers from our perspective.
Mm-hmm. We actually have a picture of that logo, and I wanted to ask you something about it too. It's graphic number 1 of the several that I sent up to there. There we go. That's the CTA's logo for 4K Ultra HD. And one question I have for you about that is, why did you include the term 4K with Ultra HD? Because as you know, they aren't precisely the same thing. You mentioned the resolution of Ultra HD, which is 3840 by 2160. 4K technically is 4096 by 2160. So I'm curious to know why you combined those two into that logo.
Yeah, so there was we had a lot of debate. Actually, CTA, when we worked on just the name before we even had a logo, we worked with the industry, and this goes back actually to 2013, if you can believe that. We wanted to get some consistency around a name that consumers would see, and we tested different variations, and Ultra HD or some flavor of that tested the best with consumers. You probably know, or you might know that. So 4K kind of came out of the studio and theatrical side. So that preceded TVs that were achieving this new level of resolution. It just happens that the next sort of step up for TVs, if you look at 1080p full HD, now you double that and double each dimension, you get 3840 by 2160. So the 2 times 1080 is where you get to 2160. The 4K ties it together with the digital cinema world, where 4K was used from kind of the Hollywood side, and the theaters that had been converted to digital cinema were 4K. And that's kind of the format that the production side used. So the 4K Ultra HD ties it all together.
I see. Okay, I was a little concerned that, you know, a lot of TV manufacturers would refer to their TVs as 4K, perhaps because it's sexier, shorter. I don't know. You know, a higher number. But it does make some sense to me now that you're mentioning this to sort of identify where it comes from. It comes from the theatrical side of things. And a lot of companies still use that term, even though what they're really talking about is Ultra HD. So I guess you've covered both bases there.
Correct. I mean, if you use the legacy of the content is 4K. That's the way the production people think about it. And the way it's rendered to consumers is the Ultra HD portion. So tying the two together is the 4K Ultra HD.
And getting back to high dynamic range, or HDR, for a moment, what what took us all so long to get there, to get where we finally got to this couple weeks ago at CES.
Yeah, so maybe this is similar to the preceding discussion. Things have to move. The content side and the display side has to move together to some extent. So, the truth is, content was mastered in fairly low dynamic range for a long time, and that's in part because our whole heritage goes back to movies, and projection just was not very bright. You don't get a lot of contrast. You don't get a lot of dynamic range. So
that's right. In a commercial cinema, up until recently with Dolby Vision, it's worse even than home video has been for a long time.
Yes, correct. So TVs have been able to do more dynamic range than content was mastered for a long time, and so it takes some willingness and some technology capability, and a lot of times what you're looking for is enough of a step up to be able to say something meaningful and show a difference to consumers, and so now, whereas things may have been mastered for what's called 100 nit, which is just a brightness off the screen. The TVs are well above 500 nits, and so there's a lot of work. There's also a bunch of technical detail that has to happen. What you don't want, one of the bad outcomes, is if content is created with one being mastered for a certain dynamic range, you pass that off to a TV that doesn't know that it's not the standard stuff, and then you get a bad outcome because the TV is mapping the video to the wrong space, so to speak, wrong dynamic range. So things will be bad. So there had to be a lot of agreements in the industry and some standards that were worked on to get us there. Right. And maybe the technology piece is that the panels are getting brighter or really should say more efficient. So just being brighter by itself, I suppose you could, like many things, if you spend enough money, you can get there.
Sure.
But it has to be cost effective, and you need to do it efficiently because TV manufacturers are also concerned about power consumption. So that's part of what's happened, is being able to make a bright enough screen in a flat panel that's thin and appealing to consumers, and to do it with good power efficiency.
Well, certainly one of the big announcements, I think the biggest announcement in my world at CES, was from the UHD Alliance, which is a consortium of companies, both TV manufacturers and content companies, studios, and even distribution companies like Netflix, all came together and hammered out a standard for Ultra HD, high dynamic range, really, and wide color gamut. In fact, somebody in the chat room, I think it was JJ to the 4884, was asking about UHD Premium, which is the name that they gave to this particular standard. And I think we have a slide on that. It's actually out of order, number 5. Let's take a look at that. And how was the CTA involved in that process, or were you?
Yeah, so the Ultra HD Alliance is its own group of companies. We have a liaison relationship with them, so it's probably not surprising that our members are also members of the Ultra HD Alliance. And we had our already existing definition for Ultra HD, 4K Ultra HD that we just talked about. Now, CTA's existing definition and logo requirements were built around resolution. When we did that, there were not agreements on high dynamic range yet. In fact, not even HDMI really didn't have a standardized way of transferring that HDR metadata, the extra information you need. So we have coordinated those conversations by, just exchanging as we've continued to work on definitions. So we knew that the Ultra HD Alliance, they said at the previous CES, they announced that their formation and stated they wanted to work on a premium specification. So, I mean, that's the key. They built it right into the name, which is a premium viewing experience. And to your earlier point, it addresses more than just resolution. So it's high dynamic range and wide color. So it's a full rendering spec.
Mm-hmm. And it also, as I understand it, includes immersive audio, though that wasn't talked about very much.
Yeah, so I think they wanted to encompass the whole the whole experience. That was true from the very start, and I think this also reflects the fact that the content companies like Fox were involved, and so it was a partnership between content and display manufacturers. And I mentioned the word rendering, so that's one of the key aspects. Is they, there's interoperability kind of standards, which say this stuff works together. In other words, the input of the TV can handle certain signals or whatever. In this case, they wanted to say that the picture and the audio that the consumer experiences meets a certain quality. So we think of that as a rendering specification.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Now, the CTA recently published its own high dynamic range standard. How does that integrate with or relate to the UHD Alliance UHD Premium standard?
Yeah, so we did our work slightly ahead. So I think we released ours in September of last year, and it attacks actually the interoperability problem we were talking about. We knew there would be HDR TVs coming out on the market. We knew they'd be announced through the fall and especially at CES, and we wanted to be able to say that when CTA talks about an HDR compatible TV, we mean the following, and that's what our definition's about. So it's about, it specifies what an HDR compatible TV needs to be able to handle on the input, and we're silent on the rendering capability, and that's sort of left to things like the Ultra HD Alliance and their premium specification.
Mm. When you and I were talking offline, I found it very interesting. You sort of drew a comparison with, say, the cell phone carriers, and they have to kind of be involved in both ends: transmission, reception, rendering, everything. Whereas here in this particular case, we've got different organizations dealing with the different parts of the signal chain. Is that likely to cause more problems without a single body dealing with the whole thing?
Well, I think it's just a fact of life, if you will, with the difference between television, which, is not just, you don't buy your products the same way you buy a cell phone or a smartphone. So what we were talking about is that in the case of a wireless carrier, they specify and acquire the devices that the consumer ultimately buys, so they're tested and they know the end-to-end capabilities, and they're highly specified and controlled. So we have this kind of vibrant market of TVs being sold directly to consumers, but all that coordination happens in the background. That's why there are standards organizations like CTA. So we handle, people look to us for the standards related to the end devices. SMPTE handles the production stuff, and then SCTE or Cable Labs will work on cable distribution standards, and ATSC works on the broadcast portion. But there are a lot of overlapping conversations and liaisons. But when there's a particular problem to be solved, like the UHD Alliance, I mean, they set out to make sure there's a certain level of experience. And that conversation happened among a group of like-minded content creators, some technology companies, and then TV manufacturers.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Blue Rules in the chat room is asking an interesting question. Why didn't Blu-ray and by extension high definition go exactly with half of true cinematic 4K, that is 4096 by 2160? So that would have been 2048 by 1080 instead of 1920 by 1080. Do you happen to have any insight on why that decision was made?
Yeah, so I was not involved in that. Blu-ray Disc Association is a similar, well, larger group of membership, but similar to the Alliance in that it is a manufacturer, and it's private companies involved in that discussion. I feel certain, though, that the answer is that the 16 by 9 is driven by 16 by 9 TVs. So, as you scale up from SD to HD, that's where you end up. The 1080 by 1920.
1920, right?
Yep.
And in fact, we're gonna talk much more about that. But before we do, I'd like to take a moment to thank another sponsor for this episode, which is Corning Optical Cables. Now, Corning has transformed the traditional USB and Thunderbolt cables from plain old copper into incredibly durable fiber optic speed demons. Whether you're into high-end video, photography, audio production, or computing, you want the best, most reliable cables out there. Now take a look at Corning's Thunderbolt and USB 3-point optical cables. Corning is known for fiber optics, and when it comes to fiber, you think of glass, and glass breaks, right? Yet Corning has figured out how to make their USB and Thunderbolt cables super strong and flexible. So flexible, in fact, you can bend them, walk on them, even tie them in a knot, and they keep transmitting at top speed. Now, I have here a Corning USB 3-point optical cable that I have connected to my printer. And as you can see, I've tied it into a very tight knot. I was kind of nervous about doing this, but I talked to a Corning representative who said, no, absolutely. And he did it on a different cable. He said, look, I'm tying it into a knot. I'm tying it really tight. It still works perfectly well. And it does. I've proven that with my own printer here. It works perfectly well. It's quite amazing. Now, speaking of speed, I have to tell you this. Corning fiber optic cables provide incredible data rates of up to 20 gigabits per second for Thunderbolt and 5 gigabits per second for USB 3. No other cable comes close. Another interesting fact, Corning optical cables are 50% thinner and 80% lighter than traditional copper cables. Corning optical cables have exceptional cable runs as well, up to 60 meters, 200 feet for Thunderbolt, and 50 meters or 165 feet for USB. Now you can declutter, move peripherals into another room, improve productivity, and increase security by putting expensive gear out of the way. Corning optical cables are longer, thinner, lighter, and stronger. Go to opticalcablesbycorning.com to learn more. And we thank Corning very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. I'm speaking with Brian Markwalter, Senior Vice President of Research and Standards at the Consumer Technology Association, or CTA. And Brian, one thing I wanted to talk with you about is the transition. We were just mentioning this before about the transition from standard def to high def and how we had to go from an aspect ratio of 4:3 to 16:9 and also higher pixel density. And now we're undergoing perhaps a similar transition from high def to ultra high def. But I found it very interesting to take a look at some of the market research that you've done. And we have some graphics to show that. Number 2 in particular gives us an idea of how things are going and what the CTA is predicting in the future. Why don't you take us through this a little bit?
Sure thing, Scott. So this is our forecast. So CTA, twice a year we do a forecast. So January and July. And January we release at CES, and that forecast covers the whole industry. In fact, every kind of product you can imagine. But displays are a huge part of that. And then in particular, when we break out according to interesting categories, and Ultra HD is one of the very interesting and fast-growing categories. So this is our forecast. Of course, 2014 is hindsight. In 2015, we're nailing down those numbers. This is sales of Ultra HD TVs in the U.S. This is U.S. market.
Mm-hmm.
So when you look, you see 2016 and out through 2019. That's our for our looking forward portion. So one thing that's interesting, not evident here, I could have done a before and after, but our July forecast from last year for 2015, we had forecasted about 4 point something million. And as we tracked sales through the year and looked going into CES and planning our number, sales had greatly exceeded our mid-year forecast. And so we raised, and we think the industry's ending up delivering around 7.1 million Ultra HD TVs. So a huge increase. And then, of course, that rippled through to next year because we raised for next year. So 13 million. And it really is amazing growth if you think about it. I think 2014 may have been the first year when really all the major manufacturers even had an Ultra HD model. So, if you think about how quickly this technology was taken up, the price came down, and consumers are walking out the door with such a huge number of them. It's an amazing story.
It really is. But I wonder, one of the things that strikes me about this graph and this growth is that the manufacturers, started making 4K TVs or Ultra HD TVs, as you say, and to the point, and the prices came down to the point where you almost couldn't go into a store and buy a 1080p TV if you were at least above a certain tier within the manufacturer's product line. You didn't really have much of a choice unless you were buying a very inexpensive, low-end or very small TV. So, in a way, it seems a foregone conclusion, right?
Yeah, but I think we'd have to figure out the cause and the effect here. So
Yes.
I think to the benefit of consumers, the technology flowed through the industry pretty quickly, and therefore prices came down, and that would have been driven by panel suppliers, with the yields going up. Whoop.
Oh, what happened there?
Lost lighting here, automatic lighting.
Oh. Okay.
Yeah, sorry about that.
You weren't moving around enough.
Yeah, I wasn't moving around enough. So what happened is prices came down, and then so naturally, the manufacturers they won't put stuff out there that consumers aren't buying. So I'll maybe push back a little bit on your premise that it's all that was available to consumers. If they aren't walking if they aren't walking out the store with them, they won't keep going that way. Retailers are super sensitive to this. And, even our early consumer research said that the satisfaction was really high with these Ultra HD TVs. So it's a great visual experience, even without native 4K content. Just the upscaling capability is an easy sell, and we did some,
and without the high dynamic range up until now.
Correct. Yes.
For the most part.
Yeah, and so there have been studies on whether consumers can. There's more impact, more visual perception from the resolution change versus high dynamic range. But I think either way, when they go in and they see a good side-by-side comparison of HD and Ultra HD, it's a fairly easy sell. And so then once the price point, gets to within kind of striking range, we know we've asked consumers lots of questions about what they intend to buy and what their reasons for buying are, what features they care about. So for TVs, it's display quality and price are always the top two. So if they can look and say, all right, that quality is so good, and that's a price I can live with, and I know I'm future proof. So I think that's what led to such the fast rise in sales there.
I got a question here that relates to that. Sentinel is asking, how does the new UHD premium spec affect 2015 TVs that have wide color gamut and HDR? For example, really the only example from 2015 is the 2015 Samsung SUHD TVs. Samsung offers a hardware upgrade path, which I think is wonderful. It's just fantastic. So it may not be too much of an issue because You know, there were a lot of TVs back then that didn't, most TVs didn't understand high dynamic range. And that gets to the point of you know, what does a TV from 2015 do when it gets the metadata for high dynamic range? I assume it would just primarily just ignore it, right?
Yeah, so there are, I think there are some techniques for passing some metadata before the standards were available. So part of what happened is last year, CTA, we had a request from Blu-ray Disc Association and HDMI to create a standard for passing this HDR metadata. And so that work was done on a really accelerated schedule to try to do this HDR metadata pass-through spec. What's probably not very well known out there is HDMI builds upon a CTA standard that specifies various formats and how to between the source and the display, how do they know which video format is being exchanged, which audio signals are being exchanged. So we added this HDR metadata signaling capability, and so that's been available to the industry all year. So I assume anything that's coming out now, and certainly CTAs, our definition of HDR compatible, requires support for that standardized metadata pass-through.
Mm-hmm. That's the HDR10 or open HDR spec, right? Because that's the one that at this point requires metadata. Dolby Vision is the other major HDR system, but it actually does not require the metadata channel that HDR10 does, right?
Correct. They have their own solution, which is fine. So manufacturers have adopted that. We think that's, you know, just part of the free market. Just as a standards developer for the whole industry, though, the problem we were trying to solve is, you know, one way for everybody to pass this metadata over the HDMI. Actually, other interfaces make use of our standard. So that's the problem we were trying to solve. And I think Blu-ray Disc Association also wanted to point to that metadata standard in their new Ultra HD specification.
Mm-hmm. Which they did, absolutely.
Yes, correct.
We have one other forecast and sales chart to show you, number 3, that actually is a global unit forecast, which breaks out China and then the rest of the world. I guess
yes.
That's kind of interesting. Tell us about this one.
Yes. So CTA partners with GfK. GfK does a worldwide research on a lot of product areas, but we partner with them on technology and consumer electronics products. So they've gathered some data, and we showed this at CES in our display update. And so one of the things that happened back when in 2013, when Ultra HD was just hitting the market, and I think we were on the order of 77,000 units or something in the U.S. China, everybody's reporting, you know, amazing numbers from China for these 4K Ultra HD TV sales. So it's not really clear what happened there. Obviously some 4K panels were going into that market, but the numbers I remember were like 80% of overall worldwide sales of 4K Ultra HD TVs were in China initially. There's some argument about whether the TVs could actually process 4K, you know, or was it just a 4K panel? But putting that aside, what happened is it reached a more realistic equilibrium here. So what you see now in 16 makes a lot more sense in terms of just how the normal market. If you look at the percents that's normally the U.S. market versus Asia or Europe, it's kind of becoming a more normal pattern here.
Mm-hmm. Well, China is a huge market, and it's interesting how quickly they went for 4K or Ultra HD TVs.
Correct.
The other piece of sales data that I want to show people, which is really remarkable, is the comparison between the adoption of HD some 10 years ago and the adoption of UHD today. I mean, look at that. That's amazing.
Sure, and yeah, this is interesting. We had chatted about this a little bit. Some of the early data on the HD we're still trying to resolve a little bit, but this is a pretty accurate representation, we think, of the early days of HD introduction. There's, first sales were actually a little bit before this, but so if we just start with 2000, when a reasonable number were starting to ship, and compare that to Ultra HD, you can see. So the red bars are HD. So this is, our HD TV transition, as we all think about it, in the late 90s and through 2000, and when we switched over from analog broadcasting to digital broadcasting. You can see this long, steady growth here. And Ultra HD, on the other hand, it speaks for itself how quickly it's ramped up.
Mm-hmm. Well, the point you make, I think, is very well taken, which is that we were switching from analog broadcasting to digital broadcasting. We were switching from CRT to flat panel, and from 4:3 to 16:9. So there was a lot of stuff going on back there in the late 90s and and 2000 roughly. Whereas now we still have flat panels. That hasn't changed. We're still at 16:9. That hasn't changed. We're still we now digitally broadcasting, and that hasn't changed. So that plus manufacturing efficiencies maybe and other factors might account for the fact that the UHD is taking off so much faster than HD did when it first came out.
Yeah, so I think we're definitely benefiting from Moore's Law here. So the digital processing, and I don't want to trivialize how hard it is to do a really great Ultra HD display. I mean, they have to fit 4 times as many pixels on there and get yield and everything, and do the processing, do upscalers that look good, and all the memory that's required. But we have the processing capability now, and memory is definitely cheaper. The first HD TVs, it was a challenge. I mean, it was sort of straight from the lab, the racks of equipment in the lab, to trying to crank out consumer TVs.
Yeah. Let's see. JJ to the 4884 in the chat room is asking an interesting question. Is 4K Ultra TV, 4K Ultra HD meant only for TVs, or can other products use this standard, like monitors, VR headsets? I might go so far as to say Ultra HD Blu-ray players. Is it a wider ranging logo / standard than just for TVs?
Yeah, that's a great question. I promise that we did. That was not a setup, but so as it turns out, CTA has spent time. Because TVs were the first products out there, and there's a need to put some definition around the marketing term, and we created this logo. Well, as it turns out, over the last year, actually, as soon as we announced the logo in 2014, we got requests. It was like, I want to use it with a cable. I want to use it with an AVR, AV receiver. So we hadn't really thought, hey, there's really a whole ecosystem here, and so we have since created a definition for cameras, for consumer cameras and camcorders, to use the 4K Ultra HD logo, for AV receivers to use the logo, and we're working on portable computing products, so tablets and laptops. And I think if you talk to retailers and talk to our board members, let's say, yes, there's, it's the whole package. It's Blu-ray players, it will be set-top boxes and streaming services, and then content and everything. So, we hope that consumers will understand over time that this 4K Ultra HD is kind of the next visual experience. Now, we hadn't been asked about the VR part, and that hasn't come up yet, but maybe another day we can talk about VR, which, as you know, was also a huge story at CES.
Huge story, huge story. I remember in that grand hallway, I forget what it's called, the arcade or the concourse or whatever.
Grand Lobby.
Grand Lobby, that's what it is. At the Las Vegas Convention Center, Samsung had set up basically a VR theater. They had, 30, 40 seats with people sitting in them wearing these VR goggles. And the seats were motion simulators, right? So they were jostling around, and these people were all just, laughing and pointing and looking around, and they all had these little VR goggles on. That would make me sick. I didn't do it. I would never do it because it would make me motion sick terribly. But it was a huge draw. I mean, everybody wanted to go. Almost everybody wanted to go try it out. And you're right. VR was like everywhere at CES. And this brings up another point, actually, which is 3D. It's so interesting that 3-4 years ago, 3D was the big thing at CES. Everybody was showing 3D TVs and so on. And then the last year or two, except for LG, which had a 3D kind of area in its booth, nobody was talking about it. Now, still the TVs have it, most of them. Vizio dropped it, but almost everybody else still has it. It's still a feature. Which you can use or not as you wish. But what happened with 3D, for heaven's sakes?
Yeah, so I think we probably were a little misaligned, and maybe in terms of content availability, and that may be a case where TV manufacturers were ahead of the content availability. It's also a harder experience to market. So what?
Because you have to wear glasses.
Yeah, and so group viewing, becomes a little bit more of a challenge. I think it's great for certain content, and I haven't looked at numbers, but I think in theaters it's still doing okay.
It's still doing great. A lot of movies are released in 3D in the commercial cinema. But interestingly, when those movies come out on Blu-ray, sometimes they're released in 3D Blu-ray, but sometimes they're not. They're just released in 2D. I find that very interesting.
Yeah, so one of the things we told consumers when 3D sets and that feature was being marketed more broadly is, whether you use it or not, you're probably getting one of the best TVs. I mean, if the TV is capable of doing 3D rendering, it means it's got a very good quality. They've figured out how to handle stereoscopic imaging to limit the motion blur and everything. So this is one of those cases where even if you don't use that feature, just think about it. Do I love this TV? And if you're happy and you like the price, then get it. And so I'm sure plenty were sold just because they were great TVs, and that feature may not have ever been used. Now, so
you're exactly right, though. You're exactly right. It was a feature on more higher end premium TVs, which even if you never used it, you got the benefit of that.
Correct. Yeah, and there have been a lot of arguments during the time so there weren't very good standards. We worked on them for the glasses, and you may remember the debates over active and passive. So active came out first. That was probably the better technology at that moment in time, but you had to charge and deal with stuff like that. So then passive kind of came in a little bit later in the process, and it may have been a little bit late in the game. Another interesting effect, and you've seen the 4K Ultra HD demos, and I'm sure some very good ones. The quality is so good. Some people describe it like a 3D experience. In other words, in a really good setup, the picture is so good, and you need to be nice and close so you get the immersion, so plenty of your field of view is taken up by the screen. But a really good image looks almost 3D because you don't see any artifacts. The resolution is so high, it looks. A lot of people describe it as like looking out of a window. That's that sort of 3D effect.
Although interestingly, when HD first came out, that same descriptor was used. It's like looking out a window.
Yes.
But now more so. And I would add to that high dynamic range getting us back to what we were talking about earlier, increases that effect, that dimensionality. That if you really have a dynamic range that more closely mimics what you see in the real world, then it's going to look more dimensional without the glasses and without the stereoscopic shenanigans that people go into, you know. So I think that that's only going to increase now that we finally have HDR as an up and coming and more common feature.
Yeah, and that's another great demo to see if the people who listen here get a chance to see a really good one, because you don't really know. I think with resolution, you kind of get a feel for it. Is, you know, like if you look at a football field or look at a stadium, you know, with SD, you just sort of see kind of colors, and HD, you could tell, all right, those are people, and I can see grass on the field. And with Ultra HD, you can see individuals and literally see what they're doing. And HDR, with a really good demo, you figure out, wow, we had to, so the sky, really, in what we're watching today, they've kind of had to compress everything out of it just because there's no rain. So everything, because clouds kind of go away, and the reflections off things get, you can't reproduce those, what they, you know, the specular reflections they talk about, the glint off a windshield or something. It's really just kind of gone because we, in the past, haven't been able to reproduce those bright spots in that range. So it's the demos are stunning with HDR.
They really are. I couldn't agree more. And I do encourage, like you just did, anyone who has an opportunity to go see a demo of high dynamic range, should go do it, because, you know, we can talk about it, and I've said this many times, we can talk about it till we're blue in the face, but really the impact comes from actually going and seeing it. Yeah.
Yep.
Well, we've got a few minutes left. Before we continue, though, I'd like to thank our final sponsor for this episode, which is Drobo. Now, as we all know, digital data is essential to our lives, and Drobo is the safe, simple, and expandable solution for all of your storage needs. Drobo offers a family of external storage arrays. You can either add your own drives or order them preloaded with storage. Drobo's 5N is perfect for network-attached storage as a media server, file server, or backup solution. It's easy to use. Just plug it into your switch or router, and you're ready to go. Apps let you back up data to 2 different cloud service providers or sync via BitTorrent Sync, which is pretty damn cool. It also works well with Plex and the new Apple TV. Photographers should check out the Drobo Mini and the Drobo 5D. The Mini is lightweight and portable at just over 2 pounds, and it has 4 drive bays for up to 8 terabytes of storage. The 5D is a desktop unit with space for 5 3.5-inch drives and a maximum capacity of 64 terabytes. Both have an optional mSATA SSD acceleration bay, which accelerates small file reads, which is especially useful with image library software like Adobe Lightroom or Apple Photos, as well as its predecessors, Aperture and iPhoto. Now, I have a Drobo 5N here, and I've put my entire iTunes library on it, and I just loved having that capability with my Sonos system, whole house audio system, with which Drobo is completely compatible. And during Christmas, I was able to just stream my Christmas library over all of the Sonoses in the house very easily, super simple to set up, had no trouble at all, and it just works remarkably well. It's beautiful. Now, Drobos are reliable, of course. Data received by your Drobo has not yet written to disk is protected if there's a sudden power loss. Even better, Drobos have an internal eUSB device where data is copied if there's a power failure to protect against long outages. They're expandable. You can add or replace drives in your Drobo with ease. No tools required. I really dug that when I was putting it together. Beyond RAID technology lets you expand on the fly and mix and match drives. They're very simple. The colored lights on the front of the Drobo communicate status. And they're fast. They support Thunderbolt, Gigabit, and USB 3.0 connections. The connection varies per model, so you want to check that out. So visit drobo.com/twit to learn more and check out their complete line of products. And when you use the code TWIT100, you'll save $100 off the purchase of a Drobo Mini, Drobo 4Bay, or Drobo 5N. That's drobo.com/twit and use the code TWIT100. We thank Drobo very much for their support of Home Theater Geeks. Now, I wanted to talk to you, Brian, a bit about broadcast, because we now have streaming, Ultra HD. We now have, as of this CES, we have Ultra HD Blu-ray, which was announced. Three companies announced Ultra HD Blu-ray players, two of which are in the $400 range, less than half of what the first Blu-ray player cost, which is amazing to me. Yeah. And we have Blu-ray, Ultra HD Blu-rays coming from many of the major studios. We'll have well over 100, I think, by the end of the year. But over-the-air broadcast is, I think, kind of a missing piece. What can you tell us about that?
Sure, and I think that's being remedied. So, what's interesting in our transition from SD to HD, that was coupled with a national transition in our broadcast system. So that was all tied together. May not be widely known, but there's a standards committee that CTA is part of and broadcasters are part of and others called ATSC that writes our broadcast transmission standards. And they're incorporated by the FCC, so it's not just by chance that broadcasters all do the same thing. So that was done, of course, in the 90s when we transitioned from HDTV or from SD to HD. So that group, ATSC, is working on a wholesale upgrade. So one of the big changes is they said, look, this we're going to make enough improvement that there's no expectation. We're not trying to do an incremental improvement. We want to be able to accommodate Ultra HD, new services, mobile, the whole deal. So kind of went with a clean sheet of paper. And honestly, it had been almost 20 years for some of the technologies. The current broadcast standard uses MPEG-2. We're well past that, as you know. Mm-hmm. So that work's underway. The first parts of the standard have been developed. There's more parts that come out this year because we have to have a complete standard up from the protocol stacks from the physical layer, how the bits are sent to how the video is compressed, and then how do TVs find channels and know what services are, and all that kind of good stuff like program guides. And mm-hmm. in this case, because it is the internet age, there's interactive elements that'll be incorporated in the standard also.
JJ to the 4884 is asking a related question. Do we need to change antennas to get Ultra HD over the air?
No, so you shouldn't. We'll see. I don't know if antenna technology improves over time. There's a huge variety of kind of better form factors, especially indoor antennas that came out through the HDTV transition. But it's going to use the same spectrum, and the power levels are all, they'll be roughly the same because the FCC has to figure out all the interactions of stations and make sure they don't interfere with each other. So kind of the physics remains the same, and therefore antennas are not likely to change any great deal.
Well, certainly if the wavelength of the transmission signal isn't changing, and as you say, the spectrum, it's going to be using the same spectrum, so that's probably true, then the antennas probably don't need to change. I agree. That makes sense to me. We did see some demos at CES, didn't we?
Yes. So LG and Samsung, they're both part of the standards process through ATSC, and they demoed. In fact, they had this was not just a booth demo. This was live over the air. There was a transmission from one of the local Las Vegas TV stations using what's called the candidate standard, so kind of the precursor to the finalized standard, all the way to the convention center, or is picked up on the roof and run down into the booth. So show attendees got to see full-blown next generation HSC 3.0 is what we call it. And one of the reasons for doing this upgrade, of course, is to accommodate things like Ultra HD. So there are some beautiful demos there.
Will the ATSC 3.0 standard also include high dynamic range, wide color gamut, the metadata required for that?
Yeah, so I expect, since most of that work has been done in terms of how HDR is going to be handled and TVs are coming out, the ATSC standard, I'm sure, is going to accommodate all the capabilities that TVs have today.
Mm-hmm. One of the things that people like Joe Kane and others in the industry are really concerned about and wanting to make sure of is that the new system, ATSC 3.0, Ultra HD, and so on, is pretty future-proof for a while. You know, I mean, we've had HD now for 10 years. Now we're transitioning to Ultra HD. And in fact, somebody in the chat room, I Am Special, says, will this chat repeat itself when 8K comes out?
Yeah. So was that a rhetorical question? Or so?
Well,
yeah,
no, it's a real. I think it's a real question because I when I talk about 4K and Ultra HD and so on, a lot of people say, well, shouldn't I just wait till 8K or 16K? NHK, the Japanese public broadcaster, has been demonstrating 8K for a number of years.
Yeah. Let me address the ATSC portion first, which is so we did learn our lesson, so to speak. And one of the requirements going into ATSC was that the system be more flexible. And so this, we learned this in making smart TVs and other things, that there's a greater expectation that things are going to get faster and better. And so one of the things that ATSC, the 3.0 standard, will do, it has this idea of sort of this wrapper, this bootstrap that says, all right, here's what's contained in this transmission, so that you can later be able to upgrade. Now, the 8K question, Japan has always done really great forward-looking work. They did the original research that defined the target for where HD TV was. In fact, they launched first with an analog system. They ultimately dropped when the rest of the world switched over to digital. And so they have a target of 8K. I think most of the world, for practical reasons, certainly, you see what's happening here. Yes, you can get demos of 8K, and there may be specialized applications. I think consumers are going to see 4K. We're going to have to see all this infrastructure and the content. It's not trivial to shoot and edit. Actually, what we hear from studios is they shoot in 4K, but producing, doing all your editing, doing your special effects in 4K and getting it all the way to the consumer, that's not a small challenge. So expecting that to go to 8K anytime soon, I think, is a little bit of a stretch. But.
I agree.
Yeah.
So when do you think we might see actual over-the-air Ultra HD broadcasting? We saw the demo at CES, but what are we, a year or two out at least before we see that? There are some big hurdles to overcome.
Yes, I don't want to speculate because it is standards work and there's a lot that has to happen. So I think standards work will continue through this year. Kind of related is that there is an auction going on of the upper end of the TV spectrum, and so that needs to happen. That's the FCC conducting that auction, so that needs to happen. So clearly it's not this year. Although Korea, so to kind of put a marker in place, Korea uses the same standard that we do. They've been great partners with us and actually do a lot of the development. Both Samsung and LG are Korean companies. And they have a target, so they're hosting the 2018 Olympics. And they've been clear they want to have broadcast of those Olympics. So they have a very aggressive and, nobody's, I think, really thinking widespread broadcast this year, but it's sometime before 2018, at least Korea is intent on using it.
Mm-hmm. Will ATSC, this standard we've been talking about, be used throughout the world or only certain countries?
If it shakes out like it has traditionally, then certain countries make their own choices. This is all, always regulated by the country. Europe has a standard called DVB. There's 8 or so countries that use the ATSC standards. I'd expect U.S. and Korea and Mexico, Canada to use it, but it's up to the countries. Now, as it turns out, the technologies, there may be minor differences, but there are discussions kind of worldwide among countries about the technologies to use. So I think there's going to be much more commonality in the next generation standards than there were in what we're doing now for HDTV.
Mm-hmm. Well, the future, as I've said before, looks mighty bright for Ultra HD. It certainly did this year at CES with the high dynamic range and higher peak brightness and so on, and all of the things we've been talking about that are likely to come to fruition in the next couple of years. And the CTA will be right there monitoring and helping guide us as we move forward into the brave new world. Brian Markwalter, thank you so much for being here.
Yes, thank you, Scott. It's been a pleasure to be here.
My pleasure as well. You can find out a lot more about the Consumer Technology Association at their new website, cta.tech. That's .tech, a new domain area, and I think highly appropriate for what the CTA does. You can always find me at avsforum.com. You can email me at scott@twit.tv. And you can follow me on Twitter at @HTGeekScott and at AVSForum. You can always find previous episodes of Home Theater Geeks right here at twit.tv/HTG and on our YouTube channel, youtube.com/twit Home Theater Geeks. Before we go, I want to make sure you know about our new weekly newsletter. This is going to be sent out every week to everyone who subscribes with all the information about what's happening at TWIT. So be sure to go to twit.tv/newsletter to subscribe. Next week, my guest geek is scheduled to be Ethan Weiner, a co-owner of Real Traps and author of the book The Audio Expert, to talk about all things audio. So that should be fascinating, and I do hope you will join us. Until then, geek out.